Welcome to this comprehensive journey through the history of Alabama, the heart of Dixie, from the ancient Native American civilizations that first called this land home, through the tumultuous periods of colonization, war, and social transformation, to its emergence as a modern state. Alabama's story is one of complexity, contradiction, and ultimately profound change. Situated in the deep south of the United States, Alabama has played a pivotal role in shaping American history. It's a state where prehistoric mounds speak of advanced civilizations, where the echoes of the Civil War still resonate, where the civil rights movement fundamentally changed America, and where innovation in science and industry continues to push boundaries today. Over the next hour, we'll explore how this land between the Tennessee River Valley and the Gulf Coast became home to diverse peoples, how it transformed from Native American territory to Spanish, French, and British colony, how it became a state, endured war and reconstruction, and ultimately emerged as a crucial battleground for civil rights and human dignity. Part 1: The First Alabamians, Prehistoric and Native American Era. Our story begins thousands of years before European feet ever touched Alabama soil. Archaeological evidence suggests human habitation in Alabama dating back at least 10,000 years. The Paleo-Indians, the first inhabitants, were nomadic hunters, following megafauna like mastodons through the forests and river valleys. The Russell Cave in Jackson County provides one of the most complete records of prehistoric life in the Southeast. This cave shelter was continuously occupied for nearly 10,000 years, offering archaeologists an unprecedented window into ancient life. Tools found here show the evolution from simple stone points to sophisticated implements, revealing how these early peoples adapted to changing environments. As the climate warmed and stabilized around 8000 BCE, the Archaic period began. These peoples developed more sophisticated tools, began cultivating plants, and established seasonal camps. Sites like the Dust Cave in northwestern Alabama have yielded remarkable artifacts from this period, including some of the oldest evidence of domesticated plants in North America. The cave also contained ancient textiles and the remains of domesticated dogs, showing the deep relationship between humans and animals. The Shell Mound period, roughly 1000 BCE to 100 CE, saw peoples along Alabama's rivers creating massive accumulations of freshwater mussel shells. These weren't just trash heaps, but carefully constructed monuments. The shells neutralized acidic soils, preserving artifacts and human remains that tell us about diet, health, and burial practices. Sites along the Tennessee River contain millions of shells, representing centuries of harvesting and feasting. But it was during the woodland period, beginning around 1000 BCE, that we see the emergence of more complex societies. These peoples built the first burial mounds, developed pottery, and established extensive trade networks. The Copina culture, centered in the Tennessee Valley, created elaborate burial complexes and traded materials from as far away as the Great Lakes and the Gulf Coast. Their distinctive pottery, decorated with complicated stamped designs, shows artistic sophistication and cultural identity. The Mississippian period, beginning around 1000 CE, saw the rise of the most complex pre-Columbian society in Alabama. The crown jewel of this civilization was Moundville, located near present-day Tuscaloosa. At its height between 1200 and 1400 CE, Moundville was one of the largest settlements in North America, covering 300 acres with 29 earthen mounds arranged around a central plaza. This was a sophisticated society with clear social hierarchies, specialized crafts, and religious ceremonies that drew people from hundreds of miles away. The society at Moundville created exquisite artifacts, engraved shells, copper plates, stone palettes that speak to both their artistic achievement and their complex belief systems. The site served as a political and religious center for a chiefdom that controlled much of central Alabama. By the time Europeans arrived in the 16th century, the Mississippian culture had largely collapsed, likely due to climate change, resource depletion, and social upheaval. In its place, several distinct Native American tribes inhabited Alabama: the Cherokee in the northeast, the Chickasaw in the northwest, the Choctaw in the southwest, and the Creek Confederacy in the central and southeast regions. The Creek Confederacy, or Muskogee, was particularly influential. This wasn't a single tribe, but a union of several groups, including the Alabama, Coushatta, and others. They lived in towns along rivers, practiced agriculture supplemented by hunting, and had complex matrilineal clan systems. Their society was democratic in many ways, with decisions made by councils rather than autocratic chiefs. These Native American societies had their own complex histories, alliances, and conflicts long before European colonization. They had developed sustainable agricultural practices, including the Three Sisters, cultivation of corn, beans, and squash. They had extensive trade networks, sophisticated governmental structures, and rich cultural traditions. Part 2: European Contact and Colonial Period. The first European to enter Alabama was Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto in 1540. De Soto's expedition, searching for gold and glory, cut a devastating path through Native American territories. His forces fought a major battle with Chief Tuscaloosa, after whom Tuscaloosa is named, at the fortified town of Mabila in October 1540. Though the Spanish claimed victory, they suffered heavy casualties and found no gold, leading them to continue west toward the Mississippi River. De Soto's expedition brought more than violence. It brought diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza that would devastate native populations who had no immunity to these old world diseases. Some estimates suggest that diseases killed 90% of the Native American population in the Southeast over the next century. For over 150 years after De Soto, Alabama remained largely free from European colonization, though the effects of European diseases continued to reshape Native societies. This changed in 1699 when French-Canadian brothers Pierre and Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne established French Louisiana, claiming the Mobile Bay area. In 1702, the French founded Fort Louis de la Mobile, the first permanent European settlement in Alabama. The fort was relocated in 1711 to the site of present-day Mobile due to flooding. Mobile became the capital of French Louisiana until 1720, serving as a crucial port and trading post. The French period saw the beginning of the complex colonial economy that would shape Alabama for centuries. The French established a plantation system, importing enslaved Africans as early as 1719. They also maintained generally peaceful relations with native tribes through trade and intermarriage, a stark contrast to later American policies. In 1763, following the French and Indian War, France ceded its territories east of the Mississippi to Britain. The British period brought new administrative structures, and an influx of traders, but their control was relatively short-lived. During the American Revolution, Spain allied with the American colonists and captured Mobile in 1780. Spanish rule from 1780 to 1813 was marked by relatively liberal policies. Spain encouraged immigration by offering land grants, welcomed diverse settlers, including Americans, and maintained peaceful relations with native tribes. The Spanish also allowed a degree of religious freedom unusual for the time. However, the young United States had its eyes on this territory. The Mississippi Territory, created in 1798, initially included only the southern portions of present-day Mississippi and Alabama. Through a series of treaties and purchases, including the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, the United States gradually extended its claims. The situation came to a head during the War of 1812, the Creek War of 1813-1814, which was part of the larger conflict, saw the Creek Nation divided between those who wanted to maintain traditional ways and resist American encroachment, the Red Sticks, and those who favored accommodation with the Americans. The decisive Battle of Horseshoe Bend on March 27, 1814, where Andrew Jackson's forces killed over 800 Creek warriors, effectively ended Native American resistance in Alabama. The subsequent Treaty of Fort Jackson forced the Creeks to cede 23 million acres, more than half of present-day Alabama, to the United States. Part 3. Territorial Period and Early Statehood. Following the Creek War, Alabama experienced rapid American settlement. The Alabama Territory was created in 1817 when Mississippi became a state, with St. Stephen's on the Tombigbee River as its capital. William Wyatt Bibb, appointed by President James Monroe, became the territory's only governor. The territorial period was marked by a massive land rush. The federal government sold former Creek lands at bargain prices, leading to the rapid establishment of farms and plantations. Towns sprang up almost overnight. Cahaba, founded in 1818, was selected as the capital of the new state, though it would later prove unsuitable due to flooding. Alabama achieved statehood remarkably quickly, becoming the 22nd state on December 14, 1819. The state constitution, written in Huntsville in just 44 days, established a government modeled on those of other states, but with provisions that would entrench the plantation system. The Constitution restricted voting to white male property owners and institutionalized slavery. The 1820s and 1830s saw explosive growth. The population increased from about 128,000 in 1820 to over 590,000 by 1840. This growth was driven by the expansion of cotton cultivation. The invention of the cotton gin had made short staple cotton profitable to grow, and Alabama's climate and soil proved ideal for this crop. This period also saw the forced removal of Native Americans. Despite the Treaty of Fort Jackson, thousands of Native Americans remained in Alabama. The Indian Removal Act of 1830, championed by President Andrew Jackson, led to the forced relocation of the Creek, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, in what became known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands died during these forced marches, and ancient connections to the land were severed. The capital moved from Cahaba to Tuscaloosa in 1826, and then to Montgomery in 1846, reflecting the shift in population and economic power toward the central part of the state. Each move represented the growing influence of the Black Belt, named for its rich, dark soil that was perfect for cotton cultivation. During this period, Alabama developed its distinctive antebellum society. At the top were the large planters who owned vast estates and hundreds of enslaved people. Below them were smaller farmers who might own a few enslaved workers, and then the majority of whites who owned no slaves but often supported the system. At the bottom were the enslaved African Americans, who by 1860 made up 45% of the state's population. This society produced immense wealth. For some, Alabama became one of the richest states in the nation by 1860, with Mobile ranking as one of the busiest ports in the country. Grand mansions rose along the rivers, and in towns like Montgomery, Selma, and Mobile. The University of Alabama was founded in 1831, though it primarily served the sons of the planter elite. Part 4: Antebellum Alabama and the Road to War. The 3 decades before the Civil War saw Alabama become the epitome of the Cotton Kingdom. By 1860, Alabama was the fourth largest cotton producer among the states, and cotton represented 60% of all American exports. This white gold created immense wealth, but also deepened the state's dependence on slavery. The enslaved population grew from about 117,000 in 1830 to over 435,000 by 1860. Their labor cleared forests, planted and harvested cotton, built houses and public buildings, and performed countless other tasks that built Alabama's economy. Despite brutal oppression, enslaved people maintained family bonds, created vibrant cultural traditions combining African and American elements, and resisted through everything from work slowdowns to occasional rebellions. The plantation system shaped every aspect of Alabama society. In the Black Belt counties, enslaved people often outnumbered whites by 3 or 4 to 1. This created a constant fear of slave rebellion among whites, leading to harsh slave codes and the creation of slave patrols to monitor and control the enslaved population. Not all white Alabamians benefited from this system. In the northern hill counties and the wiregrass region of southeast Alabama, small farmers practiced subsistence agriculture and owned few or no slaves. These regions would later show less enthusiasm for secession and the Confederacy. Politically, Alabama was dominated by Democrats who strongly supported states' rights and the expansion of slavery. The Whig Party provided some opposition, particularly in northern Alabama and among some wealthy planters who favored economic development and internal improvements. As sectional tensions increased in the 1850s, Alabama's politicians became increasingly radical in defense of slavery. William Lowndes Yancey, often called the Orator of Secession, emerged as a fire-eating advocate for Southern rights. He argued that the South should secede if the North continued to oppose the expansion of slavery. The election of Abraham Lincoln in November 1860 triggered the secession crisis. Lincoln had won without a single Southern electoral vote, and many Alabamians saw his election as a direct threat to their way of life. Yancey and other secessionists argued that Alabama must leave the Union to protect slavery and Southern civilization. On January 11, 1861, Alabama became the fourth state to secede, following South Carolina, Mississippi, and Florida. The vote in the secession convention was 61 to 39, showing significant opposition, particularly from delegates from northern Alabama. However, once the decision was made, most Alabamians rallied to the Confederate cause. Montgomery briefly became the first capital of the Confederate States of America in February 1861. Jefferson Davis was inaugurated as Confederate president on the steps of the Alabama state capitol. The Confederate government remained in Montgomery until May 1861, when it relocated to Richmond, Virginia, closer to the anticipated battlefronts. Part 5: Civil War and Reconstruction. Alabama's experience in the Civil War was marked by initial enthusiasm, growing hardship, and ultimate devastation. About 120,000 Alabamians served in Confederate forces, roughly three-quarters of the white males of military age. They fought in every major battle from First Manassas to Appomattox. While no major battles occurred in Alabama until 1864, the war affected every aspect of life. The Union naval blockade strangled trade through Mobile, devastating the economy. Cotton rotted in warehouses as inflation soared. By 1863, corn cost 30 times its pre-war price, and many families faced starvation. Women took on new roles, managing farms and plantations, working in factories producing military supplies, and serving as nurses. The Confederacy established military hospitals across Alabama, and women like Juliet Opie Hopkins, superintendent of Alabama hospitals, became legendary for their service. The enslaved population seized opportunities presented by the war. Thousands escaped to Union lines, and about 10,000 African Americans from Alabama eventually served in the Union Army. Those who remained often engaged in subtle and not so subtle resistance, from work slowdowns to providing intelligence to Union forces. By 1864, war came directly to Alabama. Union cavalry under General James Wilson swept through the state in spring 1865, destroying ironworks, factories, and military supplies. The Battle of Mobile Bay in August 1864, where Admiral David Farragut famously declared, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead," closed the last major Confederate port on the Gulf Coast. Selma, a major military manufacturing center, fell to Wilson's cavalry on April 2, 1865. Montgomery surrendered on April 12th, 3 days after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. The last Confederate force to surrender east of the Mississippi was General Richard Taylor's army at Citronelle, Alabama on May 4, 1865. The war's end brought liberation for 435,000 enslaved Alabamians, but also massive destruction and social upheaval. Much of the state's infrastructure was destroyed. The economy was in ruins, and the social order built on slavery had collapsed. Reconstruction brought both hope and violence. The Freedmen's Bureau established schools and helped negotiate labor contracts. African Americans voted for the first time, and Alabama's 1867 Constitutional Convention included 18 black delegates. In 1868, Alabama was readmitted to the Union with a new constitution, guaranteeing civil rights regardless of race. During Radical Reconstruction, 1867-1874, African Americans held political office for the first and only time until the late 20th century. Benjamin Turner, Jeremiah Harrelson, and James Rapier served in Congress. African Americans served in the state legislature and held local offices across the Black Belt. However, violent white resistance emerged immediately. The Ku Klux Klan, founded in Tennessee in 1865, spread rapidly through Alabama. Night riders terrorized African Americans and white Republicans, murdering political leaders, burning schools and churches, and driving voters from the polls. In Utah, Greene County, a riot in 1870 killed 4 African Americans and wounded over 50. The Reconstruction government achieved significant reforms despite the violence. The 1868 Constitution established public education for the first time in Alabama history. railroad construction resumed. The state established its first public welfare institutions. But Reconstruction faced overwhelming challenges. The national economic panic of 1873 weakened Republican support. White Democrats, calling themselves Redeemers, used both violence and fraud to regain control. The disputed gubernatorial election of 1874 saw both Republican and Democratic claimants, but federal authorities ultimately recognized the Democratic victory, effectively ending Reconstruction in Alabama. Part 6: Jim Crow Era and the New South. The end of Reconstruction ushered in the Jim Crow era, a period of systematic racial oppression that would last nearly a century. The 1875 Alabama Constitution began the process of reversing Reconstruction's gains, but it was the 1901 Constitution that fully institutionalized white supremacy. The 1901 Constitutional Convention, called explicitly to ensure white supremacy by law, used literacy tests, poll taxes, property requirements, and grandfather clauses to disenfranchise African Americans and many poor whites. Black voter registration plummeted from over 180,000 in 1900 to under 4,000 by 1903. Some counties with African American majorities had zero registered black voters. Segregation laws, known as Jim Crow laws, mandated racial separation in every aspect of public life: schools, restaurants, hotels, theaters, parks, water fountains, and even cemeteries. The doctrine of separate but equal was a cruel fiction. Black facilities were invariably inferior when they existed at all. Violence enforced this system. Between 1877 and 1950, white mobs lynched at least 359 African Americans in Alabama. These spectacle lynchings, sometimes attended by thousands, served as racial terrorism designed to maintain white dominance. The victims were often accused of crimes, but rarely received trials. Many were lynched for offenses like arguing with a white person or attempting to vote. Despite oppression, African Americans built their own institutions and communities. Black churches became centers not just of worship, but of education, mutual aid, and eventually civil rights organizing. Schools like Tuskegee Institute, founded by Booker T. Washington in 1881, provided education and vocational training. Washington's philosophy of accommodation and self-help was controversial, but enabled Tuskegee to survive and grow in a hostile environment. The late 19th and early 20th centuries also saw efforts to create a new South based on industry rather than agriculture. Birmingham, founded in 1871 at the intersection of two railroad lines, became the Pittsburgh of the South. The city's iron and steel industry, powered by local deposits of coal, iron ore, and limestone, the three raw materials needed for steel production, grew rapidly. By 1900, Birmingham was Alabama's largest city. The steel industry attracted immigrants from Europe and migrants from rural Alabama. The city's Sloss furnaces became one of the world's largest producers of pig iron. However, the industrial New South largely maintained the racial hierarchies of the Old South, with African Americans relegated to the most dangerous and lowest paying jobs. The textile industry also grew, particularly in eastern Alabama. Mills in places like Lanett and Opelika employed thousands, mostly poor whites, from rural areas. Mill villages, owned by the companies, controlled workers' entire lives. While providing steady wages and housing, the system also trapped workers in debt and dependency. Agriculture remained crucial but evolved. The boll weevil invasion, beginning in 1915, devastated cotton production and forced agricultural diversification. Some areas turned to peanuts, soybeans, and livestock. George Washington Carver at Tuskegee Institute developed hundreds of uses for peanuts and other crops, though his impact on agricultural practice was less than often claimed. The Great Migration saw hundreds of thousands of African Americans leave Alabama for northern cities. Between 1910 and 1970, they fled poverty, violence, and oppression, seeking jobs and freedom in places like Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland. This exodus deprived Alabama of many of its most ambitious and talented citizens, but also created networks that would later support the civil rights movement. Progressive era reforms had limited impact in Alabama. While the state adopted some reforms like railroad regulation and child labor laws, it lagged behind in education, public health, and workers' rights. The convict lease system, which rented state prisoners, mostly African Americans convicted of minor crimes, to private companies, continued until 1928. These convict laborers, working in conditions often worse than slavery, built much of Alabama's industrial infrastructure. World War I brought temporary economic prosperity and social change. Camp Sheridan, near Montgomery, trained soldiers, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, who met his wife Zelda Sayer there. African American soldiers from Alabama served with distinction in segregated units, returning with increased expectations for civil rights that would be brutally suppressed. The 1920s saw the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, which claimed over 100,000 members in Alabama. Unlike the Reconstruction era Klan, this version also targeted Catholics, Jews, and immigrants. The Klan wielded significant political power, helping elect officials from local sheriffs to U.S. senators. Part 7: Depression, War, and the Seeds of Change. The Great Depression hit Alabama with devastating force. Even before the stock market crash of 1929, Alabama farmers struggled with falling crop prices and mounting debt. By 1932, cotton sold for 5 cents per pound, below the cost of production. Farm foreclosures displaced thousands of families. Industrial workers fared little better. Birmingham's steel mills operated at a fraction of capacity. By 1933, unemployment in Birmingham reached 25%, and over 100,000 people in Jefferson County relied on relief. Homeless camps called Hoovervilles sprouted on the edges of cities. The Depression exposed the deep poverty that had always existed in Alabama. The average annual income in 1929 was $325, less than half the national average. Pellagra, a disease caused by malnutrition, affected thousands. In rural areas, many families survived on cornbread, molasses, and whatever they could grow or hunt. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal brought unprecedented federal intervention and investment. The Tennessee Valley Authority, created in 1933, built dams that brought electricity to northern Alabama, controlled flooding, and created jobs. By 1940, TVA employed over 40,000 people in Alabama and had brought electricity to thousands of rural homes. The Civilian Conservation Corps established camps across Alabama where young men built parks, planted forests, and constructed facilities still used today. The Works Progress Administration employed thousands building schools, post offices, and roads. Federal agricultural programs stabilized farm prices and introduced soil conservation practices. However, New Deal programs often reinforced racial discrimination. African Americans were excluded from many programs or received inferior benefits. The Social Security Act initially excluded agricultural and domestic workers, occupations held predominantly by African Americans. federal housing programs promoted racial segregation through redlining. The Scottsboro case became an international symbol of American racial injustice. In 1931, 9 African American teenagers were falsely accused of raping 2 white women on a train. Despite lack of evidence and recantations by one accuser, all white juries repeatedly convicted the defendants. The case, which dragged on through the 1930s, exposed the injustices of Alabama's legal system and galvanized civil rights activism nationally. World War II transformed Alabama more dramatically than any event since the Civil War. Military installations sprouted across the state. Maxwell Field in Montgomery became a major training center for pilots. The Tuskegee Army Airfield trained the famous Tuskegee Airmen, African American pilots who proved their capabilities despite military segregation. Fort McClellan, Fort Rucker, and Redstone Arsenal brought thousands of soldiers and federal dollars. War industries boomed. Mobil's shipyards employed over 89,000 workers at their peak, including many women and African Americans in previously closed occupations. The Alabama Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company built Liberty ships, destroyers, and cargo vessels. Birmingham's steel mills operated at full capacity, producing material for tanks, ships, and weapons. The war brought social tensions. The influx of workers to Mobile led to overcrowding and racial conflicts, including a major race riot at the shipyards in 1943. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers but faced discrimination and were expected to relinquish their jobs to returning veterans. For African Americans, the war created what historians call the Double V campaign: victory against fascism abroad and racism at home. Black veterans returned unwilling to accept second-class citizenship. In 1944, Alabama native Osceola McCain challenged the white primary system. Though unsuccessful, such challenges laid groundwork for the coming civil rights struggle. The immediate post-war period saw both progress and reaction. The GI Bill enabled thousands of veterans to attend college and buy homes. Though African Americans faced discrimination in accessing benefits, Alabama's economy diversified as national companies established operations in the state. Politically, Alabama began moving away from one-party Democratic dominance. The Dixiecrat Revolt of 1948, opposing President Truman's civil rights initiatives, carried Alabama for states' rights candidate Strom Thurmond. Big Jim Folsom, elected governor in 1946 and 1954, promoted populist reforms and racial moderation, but faced fierce opposition from the legislature and established interests. By 1950, pressures for change were building. The NAACP had chapters across Alabama. Despite constant harassment, African American veterans organized voter registration drives. Labor unions, though weakened by anti-union laws, promoted some degree of interracial cooperation. The stage was set for the confrontations that would make Alabama the central battleground of the civil rights movement. Part 8. The Civil Rights Movement. Alabama became the epicenter of the American Civil Rights Movement, hosting many of its most crucial battles and producing both its greatest heroes and most notorious villains. The state's fierce resistance to racial equality paradoxically created the confrontations that awakened the national conscience. The movement's origins in Alabama preceded the famous events of the 1950s and 1960s. Organizations like the Alabama State Conference of the NAACP, founded in 1941, had long fought discrimination through legal challenges and voter registration. Leaders like E.D. Nixon in Montgomery, a railroad porter and union organizer, built networks that would prove crucial. The modern movement exploded on December 1st, 1955, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger in Montgomery. Parks wasn't simply a tired seamstress, but a trained activist who had attended the Highlander Folk School. Her arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, lasting 381 days and launching the career of a young minister named Martin Luther King Jr. The boycott demonstrated the power of economic pressure and disciplined nonviolent resistance. Despite bombings of King's home and churches, harassment, and arrests, Montgomery's black community maintained the boycott until the Supreme Court declared bus segregation unconstitutional. In November 1956, white resistance intensified after the Brown versus Board of Education decision of 1954. The citizens' councils, called white citizens' councils, used economic pressure to maintain segregation. More violently, the Ku Klux Klan experienced a resurgence, conducting bombings and murders with virtual impunity. In 1956, Autherine Lucy became the first African American student admitted to the University of Alabama, but riots forced her withdrawal after 3 days. The university expelled her on a technicality and wouldn't integrate for 7 more years. Catherine Lucy's courage in facing mob violence inspired future activists even as her immediate effort failed. The Freedom Riders of 1961 brought national attention to Alabama's violent resistance to integration. When integrated buses carrying activists testing Supreme Court decisions reached Anniston on May 14, 1961, a mob firebombed one bus and beat riders with baseball bats and iron pipes. In Birmingham, Public Safety Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor allowed Klansmen 15 minutes to beat riders before police would intervene. Birmingham in the early 1960s was perhaps the most segregated city in America, earning the nickname Bombingham for the frequency of attacks on black homes and churches. The Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth had led local struggles since 1956, surviving multiple assassination attempts. His Alabama Christian movement for human rights kept the fight alive when Alabama banned the NAACP in 1956. The Birmingham Campaign of 1963 became a turning point in the civil rights struggle. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference joined Shuttlesworth for Project C for confrontation, using sit-ins, boycotts, and marches to challenge segregation. Connor's use of fire hoses and police dogs against protesters, including children, created images broadcast worldwide that shocked the conscience of America. The Children's Crusade of May 1963 saw thousands of students, some as young as 6, march from 16th Street, Baptist Church. Over 2,500 children were arrested, filling the jails. The sight of children facing police dogs and fire hoses proved a public relations disaster for segregationists. Governor George Wallace, elected in 1962 on a platform of segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, became the face of resistance. His stand in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama on June 11, 1963, where he symbolically blocked the enrollment of Vivian Malone and James Hood before stepping aside to federal authority, epitomized the theatrical nature of resistance. The movement's victories came at a terrible cost. On September 15, 1963, Klansmen bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church, killing 4 young girls, Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Carol Denise McNair. The bombing horrified the nation and demonstrated the depths of violent resistance to change. Selma became the next major battleground. Despite comprising over half the population of Dallas County, African Americans made up less than 2% of registered voters. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and local leaders like Amelia Boynton had worked for years to register voters, facing constant violence and intimidation. The Selma to Montgomery marches of 1965 culminated the Alabama movement. On March 7, 1965, Bloody Sunday, state troopers and local police brutally attacked peaceful marchers on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Television broadcasts of the violence, showing troopers beating nonviolent protesters with billy clubs and using tear gas, outraged viewers nationwide. After a federal court order, the third march from Selma to Montgomery succeeded. Beginning March 21, 1965, thousands marched the 54 miles to Montgomery, protected by federal troops. King's speech on the Capitol steps on a March 25th, asking, "How long?" "Not long," represented a triumphant moment. But violence continued. That evening, Klansmen murdered Viola Liuso, a white mother from Detroit who had come to support the movement. Earlier, they had killed Jimmy Lee Jackson, whose death sparked the Selma marches, and Reverend James Reeb, a white minister from Boston. The Selma campaign directly led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, transforming Southern politics. Within years, African American voter registration in Alabama increased from under 20% to over 60%. African Americans began winning local offices, and even George Wallace would later court black votes. Beyond the famous events, thousands of ordinary Alabamians showed extraordinary courage. They registered to vote despite economic retaliation, integrated schools despite mob violence, and sat in at lunch counters despite arrests. Local leaders like Johnny Carr in Montgomery, Reverend T.Y. Rogers in Tuscaloosa, and countless others sustained the movement between the dramatic campaigns. The movement transformed Alabama even as resistance continued. School integration proceeded slowly and often violently through the 1960s and 1970s. Economic inequality persisted, but the legal architecture of Jim Crow was dismantled, and African Americans gained political power that, while still contested, could no longer be completely denied. Part 9. Modern Alabama, Transformation and Continuity. The post-civil rights era brought profound changes to Alabama, though the pace and extent of transformation remained contested. The Voting Rights Act revolutionized Alabama politics. By 1970, Alabama had over 100 black elected officials. By 2000, it had over 750, more than any other state. Cities like Birmingham and Montgomery elected their first black mayors in 1979 and 1999, respectively. Richard Arrington Jr.'s 20-year tenure as Birmingham's mayor saw downtown revitalization and improved race relations, though economic disparities persisted. The election of black sheriffs in counties that had violently resisted civil rights marked a stunning reversal. George Wallace's political evolution symbolized broader changes. After being paralyzed in an assassination attempt in 1972, Wallace eventually renounced segregation and sought black support. His 1982 gubernatorial campaign succeeded with significant African American backing, though many remained skeptical of his conversion. His famous 1982 meeting with civil rights leaders at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where he asked for forgiveness, represented a dramatic reversal, though many questioned its sincerity. Economic transformation accelerated in the 1970s and 1980s. agriculture mechanized and consolidated, reducing farm employment drastically. The Tennessee-Tombigbee Waterway, completed in 1985 at enormous cost, failed to generate expected economic benefits, but demonstrated federal investment in the state. The project, one of the largest civil engineering projects in history, connected the Tennessee River to the Gulf of Mexico, but never attracted the commercial traffic predicted. The space industry became crucial to Alabama's economy and identity. Huntsville's Redstone Arsenal, where Werner von Braun's team developed the Saturn V rocket that took Americans to the moon, evolved into a major center for missile defense and aerospace research. NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center made Huntsville Rocket City, attracting high-tech industries and transforming northern Alabama. The Space Camp program, begun in 1982, inspired thousands of young people to pursue STEM careers. The 1980s and 1990s brought international automotive investment that reshaped Alabama's economy. Mercedes-Benz's decision in 1993 to build its first American plant in Vance shocked observers who couldn't imagine luxury cars being built in Alabama. The state offered $253 million in incentives, sparking controversy but transforming economic development strategies nationwide. Honda, Hyundai, and eventually Mazda and Toyota followed, making Alabama a major auto production center. These plants brought thousands of jobs and billions in investment, creating a new middle class, though unions largely failed to organize these facilities. Despite repeated campaigns, education remained contentious. Federal court orders mandated school desegregation through the 1970s, but white flight to private academies and suburbs often left public schools more segregated than before. Alabama consistently ranked near the bottom in education funding and achievement. The 1993 attempt at education reform, led by Governor Jim Folsom Jr., failed when opponents labeled it a tax increase. The Alabama Reading Initiative, begun in 1998, showed promise in improving literacy rates, but faced funding challenges. Higher education expanded dramatically. The University of Alabama integrated peacefully after 1963 and grew into a major research university. Its enrollment grew from 7,000 in 1960 to over 38,000 by 2020. Auburn University, Alabama State University, and other institutions expanded access to higher education. The University of Alabama at Birmingham, founded in 1969, became the state's largest employer and a major medical research center, pioneering treatments in areas from AIDS to cancer. Cultural changes proceeded unevenly. The Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham opened in 1992, and the various civil rights monuments and museums in Montgomery, Selma, and elsewhere made Alabama a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand American history. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice, opened in 2018, confronts the history of lynching in unprecedented ways. Yet Confederate symbols remained prevalent, sparking ongoing controversies. The fight over Confederate monuments intensified after 2015, with some removed but state law protecting others. Religion continued shaping Alabama culture. The state remained among the most religious in America, with evangelical Protestantism dominating. Churches often remained segregated by choice, though some interracial congregations emerged. Religious conservatives wielded significant political influence, affecting debates on education, social issues, and law. The state's politics increasingly reflected national culture war divisions. The 1990s and 2000s saw efforts to address historical injustices. The state formally apologized for slavery in 2007, prosecution of civil rights era crimes, including the 2001-2002 convictions of Thomas Blanton and Bobby Cherry for the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, brought some measure of justice decades late. The conviction of former Klansman James Seal in 2007 for the 1964 murders of Henry D. and Charles Moore showed that justice, while delayed, was still possible. Economic challenges persisted. While metropolitan areas grew, rural counties faced population loss and economic decline. The Black Belt, despite its historical significance, remained Alabama's poorest region. Industrial jobs disappeared to automation and globalization, though new industries partially offset losses. The closure of textile mills devastated communities that had depended on them for generations. Natural disasters periodically devastated communities. Hurricane Frederick in 1979, Hurricane Ivan in 2004, and Hurricane Katrina in 2005 caused billions in damage along the coast. The April 27, 2011 tornado outbreak killed 238 people and demonstrated both nature's destructive power and communities' resilience. Entire towns like Hackleburg and Phil Campbell were nearly destroyed, while Tuscaloosa suffered a mile-wide path of destruction through its heart. Environmental issues gained attention. The Mobile Bay estuary faced pollution from industrial development, coal ash contamination, agricultural runoff, and urban sprawl threatened water quality. Conflicts between economic development and environmental protection intensified, exemplified by disputes over the Birmingham Northern Beltline Highway project. The Cahaba River, one of North America's most biodiverse waterways, faced constant threats from development. Political realignment transformed Alabama from a Democratic stronghold to a Republican bastion. White voters shifted Republican, beginning with presidential elections in the 1960s, accelerating in the 1990s. By 2010, Republicans controlled all statewide offices and the legislature for the first time since Reconstruction. The 2017 special Senate election, where Democrat Doug Jones defeated Roy Moore amid scandal, proved a temporary exception to Republican dominance. This shift reflected national trends, but also specific Alabama dynamics. Social conservatism, opposition to federal authority, and racial politics all played roles. The Democratic Party became predominantly African American, creating a racially polarized political system that complicated efforts at biracial coalition building. Voter ID laws and felon disenfranchisement continued to suppress Black political participation. Immigration emerged as a new issue. Latino population growth, particularly in northern Alabama, changed demographics and sparked debates. Alabama's 2011 immigration law, HB 56, among the nation's strictest, faced legal challenges and economic backlash before being largely gutted by courts. The law's requirement that schools check students' immigration status led to widespread absences and fear in immigrant communities. The 21st century brought both progress and persistent challenges. Birmingham transformed from a declining industrial city to a growing medical and financial center. The city's downtown experienced a renaissance with new restaurants, breweries, and residential developments. Huntsville became one of America's most educated cities, attracting tech companies and startups. Mobile developed aerospace and maritime industries. with Airbus establishing a major assembly facility. Yet Alabama continued struggling with poverty, educational inadequacy, health disparities, and racial inequality. The state ranked near bottom in most quality of life measures. Rural hospitals closed at alarming rates, leaving many counties without basic medical care. The digital divide left rural areas without broadband access essential for modern economic participation. The opioid crisis devastated communities already struggling with poverty and unemployment. Contemporary Alabama embodies contradictions, gleaming automotive plants and persistent poverty, world-class medical research and widespread health problems, racial reconciliation efforts and ongoing segregation, technological innovation and educational struggles. The state that gave America the Saturn V rocket struggled to fund basic education. The state that pioneered cardiac surgery had some of the nation's highest rates of heart disease. Part 10: Alabama's Cultural Legacy. Music, Literature, and Sports. Alabama's cultural contributions to America extend far beyond its political history. The state has produced an extraordinary array of musicians, writers, athletes, and artists who've shaped American culture in profound ways. In music, Alabama's influence spans virtually every genre. W.C. Handy, the father of the blues, born in Florence in 1873, formalized the blues structure that would influence all American popular music. His St. Brooks Louis Blues became one of the most recorded songs in history. The blues tradition continued through artists like Dinah Washington from Tuscaloosa and Eddie Kendricks from Birmingham, who became lead singer of The Temptations. Muscle Shoals became an unlikely recording mecca in the 1960s. Fame Studios and Muscle Shoals Sound Studio attracted artists from Aretha Franklin to the Rolling Stones. The Muscle Shoals sound, a unique blend of R&B, soul, and rock, created classics like When a Man Loves a Woman by Percy Sledge and I Never Loved a Man by Aretha Franklin. The predominantly white session musicians, known as the Swampers, backing black artists during the height of the civil rights era, represented a kind of integration through music. Country music owes enormous debts to Alabama. Hank Williams, born in Mount Olive in 1923, revolutionized country music with his emotional honesty and songwriting genius. Before his death at 29, his songs like I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry and Your Cheatin' Heart remain standards. The group Alabama from Fort Payne became the most successful country band of the 1980s, selling over 75 million albums. Emmylou Harris from Birmingham helped create the alternative country movement. Jason Isbell from Green Hill continues Alabama's tradition of combining Southern storytelling with musical innovation. Jazz and gospel also flourished. Nat King Cole, born in Montgomery in 1919, became one of the first African American artists to host a television show. The Blind Boys of Alabama, formed at the Alabama Institute for the Negro Blind in 1939, carried gospel music worldwide while maintaining their base in Alabama. Sun Ra, born Herman Blount in Birmingham in 1914, pioneered Afrofuturism in jazz, claiming to be from Saturn while creating some of the most innovative music of the 20th century. Alabama's literary tradition matches its musical heritage. Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, published in 1960, became perhaps the most influential American novel about race and justice. Set in fictional Maycomb, based on her hometown of Monroeville, the novel sold over 40 million copies and shaped how generations understood the Jim Crow South. Her childhood friend Truman Capote, also from Monroeville, revolutionized journalism with In Cold Blood. The state produced numerous other significant writers. Zora Neale Hurston, though associated with Florida, was born in Notasulga. Walker Percy from Birmingham explored existential themes in novels like The Moviegoer. Fanny Flagg from Birmingham created beloved characters in Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. Rick Bragg from Possum Trot wrote memoirs that captured poor white Southern experience with unsentimental honesty. Helen Keller from Tuscumbia became one of the 20th century's most influential writers and activists despite being deaf and blind. Contemporary authors continue this tradition. Jesmyn Ward, though from Mississippi, attended the University of Alabama and writes powerfully about the Gulf Coast. Poets like Ashley M. Jones, Birmingham's poet laureate, explore what it means to be Black in Alabama today. The state's writers wrestle with its complex history while imagining new futures. In sports, Alabama's influence is legendary. The state's devotion to football borders on religious. The University of Alabama, under Paul Bear Bryant, became college football's most successful program, winning 6 national championships during his tenure, 1958-1982. Bryant, who played for Alabama in the 1930s, became an icon whose influence extended far beyond football. His integration of the team in 1971, though late, helped change the state. Nick Saban's arrival in 2007 initiated another dynasty. With 6 more national championships through 2020, the Alabama-Auburn rivalry, the Iron Bowl, divides families and communities every November. Auburn's moments of glory, including championships in 1957 and 2010, provide balance to Alabama's dominance. The state produced extraordinary athletes. Jesse Owens, though born in Oakville, Alabama, moved to Ohio as a child, but his roots remained in Alabama soil. His 4 gold medals at the 1936 Berlin Olympics refuted Nazi racial theories. Willie Mays, the Say Hey Kid from Westfield, became baseball's most complete player. Hank Aaron from Mobile broke Babe Ruth's home run record while facing death threats. Bo Jackson from Bessemer became the only athlete to be an all-star in both NFL and MLB. Joe Louis, born in Lafayette, became heavyweight boxing champion and a symbol of American strength during World War II. His defeat of Max Schmeling in 1938 was seen as democracy's victory over fascism. Willie McCovey from Mobile, Ozzie Newsome from Muscle Shoals, Charles Barkley from Leeds. The list of Alabama sports legends continues endlessly. In basketball, Alabama produced both players and pioneers. John Drew from Phoenix City starred in the NBA. Vanetta Flowers from Birmingham became the first African American to win Winter Olympics gold in 2002. In motorsports, Alabama International Motor Speedway, now Talladega Superspeedway, became NASCAR's fastest track, while drivers like Bobby Allison and Neil Bonnet from Hueytown made Alabama a racing power. The visual arts also flourished. The Birmingham Museum of Art, founded in 1951, grew into the Southeast's finest museums. Self-taught artists like Thornton Dial, born in Amel, gained international recognition for works confronting racism and poverty. Lonnie Holly from Birmingham creates art from found objects that speaks to African American experience and environmental destruction. Alabama's cuisine contributed to American food culture. Barbecue styles varied by region: pork shoulders in the north, ribs in Birmingham, and the unique mayonnaise-based white sauce created at Big Bob Gibson's in Decatur. Soul food traditions, preserved and evolved by African American cooks, influenced American cuisine profoundly. The Meat and Three restaurants, serving working class comfort food, became cultural institutions. This cultural production occurred not in spite of Alabama's troubles, but often because of them. Artists, writers, and musicians transformed pain into beauty, oppression into resistance, isolation into innovation. They took Alabama's complexities, its violence and gentleness, its beauty and ugliness, its tradition and innovation, and created art that speaks to universal human experiences. Part 11: Into the 21st Century: Contemporary Challenges and Opportunities. The 2010s and 2020s have brought Alabama face to face with both persistent historical challenges and entirely new realities. The state's struggle to define itself in a rapidly changing world reflects broader American tensions between tradition and transformation. The Great Recession of 2008 2009 hit Alabama hard. Unemployment peaked at 11%, and state budgets faced massive shortfalls. The recovery proved uneven, with metropolitan areas bouncing back while rural counties continued declining. The pension crisis in Jefferson County led to America's largest municipal bankruptcy in 2011, a $4 billion disaster that took years to resolve. Technology began reshaping Alabama's economy in unexpected ways. Huntsville emerged as a cybersecurity hub, with the FBI choosing it for a major operations center. The Army's Cyber Command presence at Redstone Arsenal attracted defense contractors and tech startups. Birmingham developed a growing startup ecosystem, particularly in financial technology and healthcare innovation. The Innovation Depot, opened in 2007, became one of the Southeast's largest business incubators. However, the digital divide remained stark. While Huntsville had some of the nation's fastest internet, rural counties lacked basic broadband. This gap became critical during the COVID-19 pandemic, when education and work moved online. Students in the Black Belt often couldn't access online learning, exacerbating educational inequalities. Healthcare emerged as both an achievement and crisis. UAB Hospital pioneered treatments and conducted groundbreaking research, including early COVID-19 vaccine trials. Yet, Alabama had some of the nation's highest rates of diabetes, heart disease, and maternal mortality. Rural hospital closures accelerated. 15 hospitals closed between 2011 and 2021, leaving entire counties without emergency care. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed and intensified these disparities. Alabama had one of the nation's lowest vaccination rates, with political polarization affecting public health responses. The virus devastated Black Belt counties, where poverty, poor health, and limited medical access created perfect conditions for tragedy. Yet the pandemic also showed resilience, with communities organizing mutual aid and healthcare workers showing extraordinary dedication. Criminal justice reform became a pressing issue. Alabama's prisons, operating at nearly 200% capacity, faced federal intervention over conditions described as cruel and unusual punishment. The state's harsh sentencing laws, including life without parole for certain drug offenses, contributed to having one of the nation's highest incarceration rates. Efforts at reform face resistance from tough on crime politics and private prison interests. Education continued to struggle with inadequate funding and achievement gaps. Alabama spent $9,696 per student in 2019, well below the national average of $12,612. Reading and math scores lagged national averages, particularly for Black and low income students. Teacher shortages became critical, with many counties unable to fill positions. The Alabama Literacy Act of 2019 aimed to improve reading instruction, but faced implementation challenges. Environmental challenges intensified with climate change. Stronger hurricanes threatened the coast more frequently. The 2020 hurricane season saw multiple storms impact Alabama. Rising temperatures affected agriculture, with traditional crops struggling. Water disputes with neighboring states, particularly Georgia and Florida, over river systems, intensified as droughts became more common. The state's politics remained conservative, but showed signs of change. While Republicans maintained dominance, urban areas became increasingly Democratic. Young voters, particularly college educated ones, showed different priorities than their parents. The 2017 Senate race, where Doug Jones defeated Roy Moore, suggested possibilities for Democratic victories under specific circumstances, though Jones lost in 2020 to Tommy Tuberville, the former Auburn football coach. Immigration continued transforming Alabama's demographics. The Latino population grew 158% between 2000 and 2020, the second fastest growth rate nationally. Immigrants revitalized declining towns, opening businesses and filling essential jobs. Albertville became over 30% Latino, with quinceañera shops next to traditional Southern stores. Yet anti-immigrant sentiment remained strong in many areas. Economic development efforts showed mixed results. While automotive plants provided stable employment, they couldn't replace all lost manufacturing jobs. Amazon opened fulfillment centers but faced criticism over working conditions and wages. The promise of bringing back manufacturing jobs often proved illusory as automation reduced workforce needs. Cultural changes accelerated, particularly in cities. Birmingham's food scene gained national attention, with chefs like Frank Stitt earning James Beard Awards. The city's civil rights district attracted hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Huntsville's growing diversity, driven by the space and tech industries, created a more cosmopolitan culture. Montgomery developed the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum and National Memorial for Peace and Justice, confronting historical trauma while attracting cultural tourism. Yet the past remained present. Confederate monuments still stood in many towns. School segregation persisted through residential patterns and school choice policies. The achievement gap between black and white students remained among the nation's largest. Voting rights faced new challenges through voter ID laws, polling place closures, and felon disenfranchisement affecting 1 in 7 black adults. Recent years have seen renewed activism. The Black Lives Matter movement found strong support in Alabama cities following George Floyd's murder. Young activists connected contemporary police violence to historical patterns. Environmental justice movements highlighted how pollution disproportionately affected Black and poor communities. Labor organizing showed signs of life, including the high-profile but ultimately unsuccessful Amazon unionization drive in Bessemer. The 2020s began with Alabama at a crossroads. The state's young people were more educated and diverse than ever, but often left for opportunities elsewhere. The economy showed pockets of innovation amid widespread stagnation. Cities progressed while rural areas declined. The state that gave America the civil rights movement struggled with voter suppression. The state that sent humans to space couldn't provide broadband to all its citizens. Conclusion: Alabama's continuing journey. As we conclude this journey through Alabama history, we see a state shaped by profound contradictions and transformations. From the sophisticated societies of Moundville to the modern aerospace industry of Huntsville, from the horrors of slavery and segregation to the heroism of the civil rights movement, Alabama's story encompasses triumph and tragedy, progress and resistance, innovation and tradition. Today's Alabama bears the imprints of all its history. Native American place names dot the map: Tuscaloosa, Opelika, Chilachi, Conacu. Antebellum mansions stand near modern automotive plants. Civil rights monuments share space with Confederate memorials. The same state that violently resisted integration now has more black elected officials than any other. The same ground that grew cotton with enslaved labor now builds Mercedes-Benz vehicles with international workers. The state's contributions to America have been immense and complex. Alabama gave the nation the civil rights movement that redeemed American democracy. It provided the rockets that took humanity to the moon and continues advancing space exploration. Its music, from the blues of W.C. Handy to the country of Hank Williams to the soul of Muscle Shoals, enriched American culture immeasurably. Its writers, from Harper Lee to Rick Bragg, illuminated the American experience. Its athletes, from Jesse Owens to Hank Aaron, showed excellence under pressure and dignity in the face of hatred. Yet challenges persist with stubborn consistency. Poverty rates remain high, 15.5% overall, and over 30% in some Black Belt counties. Educational achievement lags. Only 26% of adults have bachelor's degrees, compared to 33% nationally. Health disparities reflect historical inequalities. Alabama has the nation's third highest rate of diabetes and second highest rate of hypertension. Political polarization impedes progress on shared challenges. Climate change threatens coastal communities and agricultural regions. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed and exacerbated existing vulnerabilities. Alabama's future depends on how it reconciles with its past while adapting to changing realities. The state's young people, increasingly diverse and educated, may chart new directions. Economic diversification continues, though unevenly. Technology offers opportunities to overcome geographic isolation. Demographics shift as immigration and urbanization reshape communities. The questions facing Alabama are fundamental. Can it overcome the burden of history while honoring its heritage? Will economic growth reach all communities or remain concentrated in metros? Can education improve to match modern demands? Will political systems become more inclusive and responsive? Can racial reconciliation move beyond symbolism to substantive equality? How will climate change reshape the state's geography and economy? Can Alabama retain its young talent, or will brain drain continue? Alabama's history teaches that change comes slowly and often painfully, but it does come. The state that seemed permanently wedded to segregation elected black mayors and sheriffs. The agricultural economy transformed into automotive and aerospace production. The Heart of Dixie became home to immigrants from around the world. The state that once banned teaching evolution now conducts cutting edge scientific research. Understanding Alabama's history is essential for understanding America. The state's struggles with race, poverty, and progress mirror national challenges. Its failures reveal American failures. Its successes demonstrate American possibilities. Alabama has been America's mirror, reflecting both its highest aspirations and darkest impulses. The state stands as a reminder that history isn't destiny, but it shapes possibility. The same forces that created oppression can be redirected toward justice. The same communities that enforced segregation can embrace diversity. The same soil that supported slavery can nurture freedom. But these transformations require conscious choice, sustained effort, and moral courage. As Alabama moves forward, it carries all its history, the achievement and the shame, the progress and the resistance, the dreams fulfilled and dreams deferred. That history doesn't determine the future, but it shapes the context in which Alabamians will write the next chapters of their continuing story. The journey through Alabama's history reveals not a finished narrative, but an ongoing struggle to create a more perfect society. From the ancient mounds to the modern rockets, from the cotton fields to the automotive plants, from the Edmund Pettus Bridge to the halls of power, Alabama's story continues to unfold, reminding us that history is not just about the past, but about the possibilities and responsibilities of the present and future. Perhaps Alabama's greatest lesson is that transformation is possible, but never guaranteed. The arc of history bends toward justice only when people have the courage to bend it. In Alabama, we've seen both the worst of what America can be and glimpses of what it might become. The question for each generation is which vision they'll work to realize. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Alabama history. The story continues, written daily by teachers struggling in underfunded schools, by activists fighting for justice, by entrepreneurs creating opportunities, by artists transforming pain into beauty, by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Each generation must decide what role they will play in writing the next chapter of this complex, challenging, and ultimately hopeful narrative of a state and its people.